In the shadowed lands of medieval Europe, where ancient castles guard secrets darker than the night, a devoted priest embarks on a harrowing quest to hunt down a merciless demon preying on innocent villagers. Bound by faith, haunted by history, and entangled in a web of war and betrayal, his journey will reveal that the greatest evil often lies not in monsters, but in human hearts. Welcome to a tale of terror, redemption, and the relentless fight against darkness. The wind howled like a starving beast through the dead oaks of Black Hollow. The road was narrow, soaked with mud and rot, and the carriage wheels struggled to move. Father Aldrich sat in silence, his hands clutched around a worn leather-bound Bible. His eyes, deep-set and sharp like a falcon's, remained fixed ahead, even as the coachman muttered prayers under his breath. It was the year of our Lord 1348, and the plague had swept across Europe like the devil's breath. But the village of Black Hollow was not struck by disease. No, it was something far worse. They said the church bell rang every night at the stroke of midnight, though no priest had served there for 20 years. The church had burned, the bell tower collapsed, yet the sound persisted, and with it came the disappearances. Children mostly. A summons had come in blood-red wax, sealed by Bishop Armand of Rouen. "Go," it said, "to Black Hollow, and see for yourself what tolls the bell." The village came into view, little more than a cluster of timber houses huddled under gray skies. No smoke rose from the chimneys, no dogs barked, no birds sang. The coachman halted. "I will go no farther, Father," he said, voice trembling. "I'll wait here till dawn, if you aren't back by then." He left the sentence unfinished. Father Aldrich stepped down. The air was heavy, thick with the stench of stagnant water and something fouler beneath. He walked with quiet authority, his long cloak dragging over fallen leaves. Every window he passed was shuttered, every door bolted. He reached the center of the village and found the ruins of the chapel. It stood like a skeleton. The bell tower had collapsed long ago, its stones blackened by fire. Only the stone altar remained intact, though overgrown with ivy. On it lay a single dead crow, its eyes pecked out, its wings nailed to the wood. Then the bell rang. It echoed through the hollow like a scream through bone. Aldrich's head snapped up. There was no bell tower left, no bell. And yet, 12 times, midnight, a chill spread through him. Not of fear, but recognition. This was no ghost. This was a summoning. He turned, Anne and the children were there. 7 of them, pale as chalk, barefoot, eyes wide but empty. Each held a candle. The flames did not flicker in the wind. "Who called you?" Aldrich asked, voice even, commanding. The children said nothing. Then one of them, a girl with blood-matted hair, pointed toward the well behind the chapel. Aldrich approached it slowly. The stones were damp. Moss clung to the edges. He peered into the darkness below and saw eyes, hundreds of them, floating just beneath the surface. Then the whispers began, low at first, like insects crawling through language. "Aldrich, confess. Aldrich, return." He stepped back. The girl spoke finally. "He's waiting," she said, voice too old for her face. "Who?" "The bell ringer." Aldrich turned toward the altar again. The crow was gone. In its place was a handprint burned into the stone, black with long claw-like fingers. That night, Aldrich took shelter in the abandoned vicar's house. The furniture had rotted and mold grew along the walls, but he found the old prayer book of Father Elric, the priest who had once served this village before vanishing. Its pages were warped, many illegible, but one passage remained intact. He rings the bell to gather the lost, to feed the thing below. Do not look into its eyes. Do not speak your true name. And above all, never answer the toll. Aldrich prayed for the first time in many years, and at midnight once more, the bell rang. But this time, something knocked at the door. 3 soft knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. The same rhythm as the bell. Aldrich stood. He did not answer. Instead, he recited a prayer of binding, words in Latin he had not used since the exorcism at Montbrun. The knocking ceased. But outside, in the mist, he heard it, footsteps, and the dragging of chains. When dawn broke, the bell was silent, but 7 more crows lay dead outside the chapel, and the well was dry, as if it had swallowed what it had summoned. Father Aldrich left the village without speaking a word to the coachman. He knew now what he faced. This was not a haunting, it was a harvest. And the bell was only the beginning. The knock came again, 3 soft taps, a pause, then 3 more. Father Aldrich stood motionless, the Latin prayer caught between his lips and tongue. His breath steamed in the cold, stagnant air of the abandoned rectory. The candle before him flickered, not from any wind, but from something far older than air, than silence. He moved to the window, careful not to make a sound. He parted the brittle curtain just enough to see the fog-thickened street outside. Nothing. But in the distance, beyond the ruins of the chapel, he saw movement. A man, draped in black robes, tall, walking with inhuman stillness. His head was covered by a hood, and in his hand he carried a long iron rod. The fog coiled around him like obedient dogs. Aldrich's heart clenched. He had seen this figure once before, 12 years ago, during the exorcism at St. Avon's Abbey, the Black Abbey. St. Avon had once been a place of prayer. Now it was a ruin avoided by mapmakers. Aldrich had been called there to investigate a possessed novice, but he had found much more. The entire abbey had been feeding something beneath the chapel floor, offering chance and flesh in exchange for forbidden knowledge. He had burned the place, but some things don't burn, especially not the man in the black robe. Back in Black Hollow, Aldrich left the window. He opened his Bible and found the page he had marked, Psalm 91. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night. He recited it under his breath as he opened the door and stepped outside. The village was empty. The mist curled through every alley. The moon hung low and red. He made his way to the chapel ruins. The dead crows from before were gone, but something else had been left behind. A circle drawn in black ash at the foot of the broken altar. Symbols surrounded it, Enochian script, Latin, and something older. At its center, a candle, still burning, though no wax remained. Suddenly a whisper, not from within his ears, but inside his skull. Aldrich, it is time. He turned, and the man from the Black Abbey was there, closer than before. 10 feet away, he stood unmoving, the iron rod in hand, his face still hidden. But when he spoke, Aldrich heard many voices inside the one. You silenced our choir in Saint-Avin, burned our pages, drove our monks to hang themselves by their own entrails. I did what was necessary, Aldrich said. His voice did not tremble. You failed, the figure said. The bell tolls once more. Aldrich drew the silver crucifix from his coat. It was not ornamental. It had drawn blood from demons. The figure hissed, and the mist retracted. I know what sleeps in the well, Aldrich said, and I know your name. The figure paused and stepped back into the mist and vanished. But where he stood, something remained. A book, bound in black leather, no title. Aldrich picked it up with gloved hands. The pages were warm. On the first was written in blood, to answer the toll is to enter the gate. To enter the gate is to feed the root, and the root remembers you. Aldrich closed the book. Behind him, the well began to scream. The screams from the well did not cease. They rose like wind through rusted bells, climbing in pitch until Father Aldrich could feel his molars vibrate. He stumbled back, clutching the black book against his chest, his crucifix dangling from his clenched hand, and then silence. Not the quiet of peace, but the suffocating void of breath held in fear. Behind him, the air shifted. No footsteps, no rustling, just presence. He turned slowly. Nothing, but the candle in the circle of ash still burned, and the shadows it cast on the chapel wall twitched. Aldrich stepped forward. He examined the circle. recognizing symbols from the Sigillum Dei Emeth, a forbidden diagram said to grant the user dominion over angels and demons alike. No novice could draw such things. This was the work of someone who had studied deeply, maybe even worshipped. He looked down into the well. Blackness stared back, not empty, not full, alive. He whispered an incantation and tossed a small silver vial into the pit. Nothing happened until the 34th second. At exactly that moment, a soundless explosion erupted from the shaft. The candle extinguished. The book in Aldrich's hands hissed and trembled. From the well, mist poured out, not fog, but memory, writhing in forms both human and wrong. Faces, screaming, children, soldiers, priests, skinned, hollow-eyed. And at the heart of it all, a woman chained, weeping black tears, her mouth sewn shut with rosary beads. Aldrich knew her face. He had seen it in paintings hidden behind false walls in monasteries that burned to the ground. He had seen it in the dreams of possessed children. She was called the Bride Beneath, a forgotten saint, or a demon pretending to be one. And tonight her presence had awakened again. He returned to the rectory, locked the door, lit 3 blessed candles, and placed the black book on the table. Then he opened his journal. The 34th night has come again, just as it did in Saint-Malo, just as it did in Brock's Hollow. Always with the well, always with the candle, the same face in the mist. He stopped writing. A knock. 3 soft taps, a pause, 3 more. But this time it came from inside the house, from beneath the floorboards. He dropped the pen. Silence returned. Then a whisper, not his own, echoed from the walls. "We remember you, Aldrich. Do you remember us?" He did. He remembered the children who spoke with the voice of wolves. He remembered the man who levitated for 3 days until his spine bent backwards and split his chest. He remembered the song, a lullaby sung in a language older than Latin. And outside in the village that song began again, faint, sung by many. Aldrich looked out of the window. The villagers were standing in the street, all of them, motionless, eyes black, mouths open in perfect unity, humming the same ancient tune. And behind them, at the edge of the fog, the man from the Black Abbey watched. The bell rang at midnight. No one had pulled the rope. Father Aldrich bolted upright from his prayer, heart thudding like a war drum. The toll was slow, heavy, 12 deep chimes that rattled the windows of the rectory. Each one sounded wet, as if the bell had been soaked in something thick. He threw on his cloak and opened the door. The fog was thicker now, swallowing the village whole. Only the steeple of the chapel rose above it, pointing like a broken finger at the sky. As he approached, Aldrich saw that the great wooden doors of the church stood open. Candles flickered within. He stepped inside and froze. The pews were empty, but the altar was not. Blood pooled across the stone like spilled wine, flowing in perfect lines, forming a circle. At its center, where the crucifix once stood, now hung a skinned lamb, its legs tied with rosary beads, eyes still blinking. Beneath it, carved freshly into the altar, were words in Latin, Ecclesia mea est sepulchrum, my church is a tomb. Aldrich's breath misted in the cold air. He looked to the choir loft, where the bell rope ended, and saw movement. Slowly he climbed the steps. The stairwell stank of burnt wax and old milk. At the top he found the bell still swaying. On the floor lay Brother Eloy, the young acolyte, his throat slit ear to ear, yet his lips still moving, mouthing words in silence. Words Aldrich recognized from forbidden psalms. He dropped to his knees, pressing 2 fingers to the boy's lips. No breath, no warmth. Still the mouth moved. Then the boy's eyes opened, and from his mouth came a voice not his own. You cannot bury what was never dead. The body convulsed, limbs jerking like a puppet in broken rhythm until it slumped. Dead for real this time. Aldrich stood in the bell tower, gripping the rope. He had seen signs like this before, in the ruins of Saint-Yvan, in the cursed catacombs beneath Vézelay. Always the blood, Always the dead that speak, always the Lamb. But this time, there was something older in the air. Not just a demon or revenant, something pre-Christian, pre-Roman, something buried beneath stone and oath. He looked through the window toward the graveyard. Every grave had been opened, not dug up, peeled back like lids from coffins made of flesh. He descended in haste. In the nave, the candle flames bent backward, as if inhaled by something unseen, and on the wall, beneath the stained glass of St. Lucia, appeared a handprint, burned into the stone, larger than a man's, clawed. Then the bell rang again, once, and the corpse of Brother Eloy screamed. By dawn, the mist had thickened into a living wall. The sun never rose over Black Hollow that morning. Father Aldrich remained in the chapel, pacing the nave, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. Outside, the village was silent, unnaturally so. No bird, no dog, no sound of carts, as if the world were holding its breath. He had wrapped Brother Eloy's body in linen and placed it at the altar, anointed it with oil, but the lips had kept twitching, so he'd sewn them shut. Even now, the stitches strained. Then came the knock. 3 slow raps on the chapel door. Aldrich opened it. Standing before him was a woman, tall, veiled in black, with skin like ash and a voice like honey poured over broken glass. "Are you the priest?" He nodded. "Then I must confess." She stepped inside before he could answer. Her gown left a trail of dry earth and rose petals. Her bare feet made no sound on the stone. They sat in the confessional. Her words were soft, but they curdled the air. "I buried my children beneath the chapel, Father. All 7 of them. Not by choice, but by oath." Aldrich's knuckles whitened around his rosary. "What oath?" She smiled. "The Black Abbey was never Christian. This land was already holy before Rome came. We swore to keep it sleeping, but the war broke the seals. The blood awoke the old pact." "You killed them to renew the pact?" "No," she whispered. "I killed them to protect the living, the dead." They were stirring. Then she handed him a key, ornate black iron shaped like a serpent. "It opens the crypt beneath the pulpit. The truth sleeps there, and it dreams." She stood and left, dissolving into mist. Aldrich stood at the pulpit, key in hand. The chapel was dead silent. Even the flies had vanished. He bent down, pried loose the stone slab beneath the lectern, and revealed a stair spiraling into pitch black. As he descended, the air grew colder, and then warmer, like breath. The walls were carved with faces, hundreds of them, screaming in silence. At the bottom was a chamber, round, domed, filled with 7 stone coffins, each marked with a name. Leonard, Beatrice, Alaric, Noello, Gaston, Sabine, Eloy. His blood froze. The last name, Eloy? Brother Eloy, the boy from the bell tower. He stepped closer to the last coffin. It was open, empty. Then something moved in the shadows behind him. He turned just in time to see a hand, pale and small, slide along the wall. A child's hand. Then another. And then a voice. "Fathers, I'm hungry." A little girl stepped into the dim light. Her dress was stitched from priest robes. Her eyes were pure black. Then came a second child. Then a third. All 7 emerged, silent, watching. Aldrich backed away, holding up his crucifix. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti," the children laughed. Their mouths did not move. The laughter came from the stone coffins. Aldrich stumbled backward, up the stairs, and slammed the crypt shut behind him. The key grew hot in his palm. He knew now. This was no haunting. This was a resurgence. Something had been kept beneath this land. Something that required blood oaths and sacrifice. And now, it stirred once more. Back in the chapel, the altar was burning, not in flame, but in a glow of cold light rising from the blood-soaked circle. Whispers slithered from its edges. He turned and saw the stitched lips of Brother Eloy begin to move again. The stitches snapped. "They're not children, Father. They are the dead. And the church built its house upon the bones of the forgotten." The rain returned as night fell, drumming softly on the chapel roof like whispers of ancient serpents speaking in Latin. Father Aldrich had not closed his eyes since dawn. He sat in the dim sanctuary beside Brother Eloy's body, carefully sewn and still wrapped in linen, but dark blood stains slowly bloomed through the fabric like black roses. He was desperate for answers, and only one place could hold them. Beyond the black hollow, on a jagged cliff tangled with nettles and briars, stood the ruined watchtower of Castle Lestrange, an abandoned fortress since the Great Plague, once home to a noble family who vanished without a trace overnight. Beneath the castle was said to lie a secret library, a vault of heresies, hidden behind false walls and protected by curses. No villager dared approach it, but Aldrich did. The castle was a skeleton of stone, crumbling turrets, ivy strangling every window. The great oak door, bound with rusted iron, creaked as Aldrich pushed it open. A wave of ancient dust and mildew swept over him. Inside, the grand hall lay in ruins, beams shattered like broken bones. A broken chandelier hung like the corpse of a giant spider. Yet the altar on the left, long defaced, still bore the mark of the serpent, etched deep into scorched marble. The same mark as on the key. He followed the trace, through cracked corridors and winding staircases, past rotting portraits whose faces had dissolved into nothing. At last, he reached a wall of black bricks without seams. The key in his pocket pulsed with a strange warmth. He pressed the key to the wall. A low groan echoed. The bricks shimmered, then vanished like smoke. A spiral staircase revealed itself, descending into darkness. The air grew thick with the scent of incense and dried blood. He descended into a circular chamber lit by flickering blue candles that never melted. Books lined every inch of the walls, dozens, maybe hundreds, bound in flayed skin. A wooden desk stood at the center, piled high with scrolls and ancient manuscripts. One lone candle burned atop the pile. Aldrich unrolled the top scroll. It was a ledger, names and dates stretching back to the 9th century. All were penned by the same hand. Next to each name was written, "Given." He turned the page. The pact requires 7, always 7. Blood of innocence sealed beneath the altar to keep the sleeper dreaming. Another page? He must be buried by a blood warder. Without the rite, the land opens. The debt rises, the dead walk. He found a symbol drawn in black wax, a circle of thorns enclosing an eye, and then a page that chilled his very soul. When the church arrived, they called the pact heresy. They burned us alive. But the rite was kept, buried in Latin beneath their cathedrals. The debt remains. The abbey was built atop the wound. Suddenly footsteps echoed behind him. A voice whispered, "You read too far, priest." He spun around. A tall, hooded figure stood in the doorway, clutching a staff made of bone. The children were not the first, nor will they be the last. The rain returned as night fell, drumming softly on the chapel roof like whispers of ancient serpents speaking in Latin. Father Aldrich had not closed his eyes since dawn. He sat in the dim sanctuary beside Brother Eloy's body, carefully sewn and still wrapped in linen, but dark blood stains slowly bloomed through the fabric like black roses. He was desperate for answers, and only one place could hold them. Beyond the black hollow, on a jagged cliff tangled with nettles and briars, stood the ruined watchtower of Castle Lestrange, an abandoned fortress since the Great Plague, once home to a noble family who vanished without a trace overnight. Beneath the castle was said to lie a secret library, a vault of heresies, hidden behind false walls and protected by curses. No villager dared approach it, but Aldrich did. The castle was a skeleton of stone, crumbling turrets, ivy strangling every window. The great oak door, bound with rusted iron, creaked as Aldrich pushed it open. A wave of ancient dust and mildew swept over him. Inside, the grand hall lay in ruins, beams shattered like broken bones. A broken chandelier hung like the corpse of a giant spider. Yet the altar on the left, long defaced, still bore the mark of the serpent, etched deep into scorched marble. The same mark as on the key. He followed the trace, through cracked corridors and winding staircases, past rotting portraits whose faces had dissolved into nothing. At last, he reached a wall of black bricks without seams. The key in his pocket pulsed with a strange warmth. He pressed the key to the wall. A low groan echoed. The bricks shimmered, then vanished like smoke. A spiral staircase revealed itself, descending into darkness. The air grew thick with the scent of incense and dried blood. He descended into a circular chamber lit by flickering blue candles that never melted. Books lined every inch of the walls. Dozens, maybe hundreds, bound in flayed skin. A wooden desk stood at the center, piled high with scrolls and ancient manuscripts. One lone candle burned atop the pile. Aldrich unrolled the top scroll. It was a ledger. Names and dates stretching back to the 9th century. All were penned by the same hand. Next to each name was written, "Given." He turned the page. The pact requires 7, always 7. Blood of innocents sealed beneath the altar to keep the sleeper dreaming. Another page. They must be buried by a blood warder. Without the rite, the land opens. The debt rises. The dead walk. He found a symbol drawn in black wax, a circle of thorns enclosing an eye, and then a page that chilled his very soul. When the church arrived, they called the pact heresy. They burned us alive. But the rite was kept, buried in Latin beneath their cathedrals. The debt remains. The abbey was built atop the wound. Suddenly footsteps echoed behind him. A voice whispered, "You read too far, priest." He spun around. A tall, hooded figure stood in the doorway, clutching a staff made of bone. The children were not the first, nor will they be the last. Father Aldrich stood at the edge of the ancient crypt beneath the abbey, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten prayers. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the tattered parchment containing the ritual instructions. Ink faded but still legible. The time had come to face the darkness that had plagued his village, the curse rooted deep in history and blood. The bone reader's warnings echoed in his mind. 7 sacrifices, 7 guardians, and a sleeper beneath the earth. The ritual was the only way to renew the pact, to keep the ancient evil dormant. With a deep breath, Aldrich began the preparations. Candles of black wax were lit, forming a circle around the altar, inscribed with ancient runes he had painstakingly copied from the scrolls. He drew the circle with salt and sprinkled holy water. Outside, the wind howled through the abbey's broken windows, carrying distant whispers like cries from beyond the grave. As he recited the Latin prayers, the shadows seemed to writhe and pulse, alive with a malevolent energy. Suddenly, the candles flickered violently, and a cold hand gripped his shoulder. He spun around, but no one was there. The room grew colder. A voice, faint and hissing, whispered from the darkness, "Break the pact, and we rise." Aldrich steadied himself, gripping the crucifix tightly. "No," he vowed, "not while I still breathe." Father Aldrich's breath came in short gasps as he stood alone in the crypt's dim light. The cold hand that had touched his shoulder lingered in his skin, an icy mark that seemed to seep into his very bones. His heart raced, but his resolve remained unbroken. The fate of the village, and perhaps the world, rested on his shoulders. He glanced at the circle of black candles flickering on the cold stone altar, the ancient runes etched into its surface, glowing faintly in the wavering light. Outside, the wind howled with a sinister chorus, as if the very air carried the voices of those long dead. Aldrich knew the ritual he began was just the beginning. The darkness he fought was old, older than the abbey itself. and it whispered promises and threats in a language only the damned could understand. His fingers brushed the crucifix hanging from his neck as he knelt in prayer. He called upon every ounce of faith he possessed, pleading for strength against the evil lurking beneath the earth. Suddenly a low whisper floated through the chamber, soft yet unmistakably clear. "You cannot stop what is coming." A shiver ran down Aldrich's spine. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and curl, forming shapes that danced just beyond the edge of sight. His eyes narrowed. He had to hold on to his faith. Losing it meant certain doom. The bone reader's words echoed again. "The sleeper will rise unless the pact is renewed, but the cost is great. Blood must be spilled, willingly or not." Aldrich clenched his fists. He would not let more innocent lives be sacrificed. The villagers had already paid too high a price. Hours passed like this, the only sound, the occasional flicker of candle flames, and the distant howl of the wind. Then a sudden chill swept through the chamber, and the ground beneath his knees trembled. From the darkness emerged a figure, cloaked, indistinct, yet radiating a palpable evil. Aldrich stood slowly, clutching his crucifix tightly. "Who dares to defile this sacred ground?" he demanded. The figure's voice was like dry leaves scraping stone. "I am the sleeper's herald. The pact is broken. Darkness will reign." Aldrich's eyes burned with determination. "Not while I breathe." The chamber seemed to close in as the figure advanced, and Aldrich began the exorcism prayers, voice steady despite the terror clawing at his mind. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of decay and ancient malice. Shadows roared and twisted, forming a vortex of darkness that threatened to swallow all light. Suddenly, the figure lunged forward and Aldrich braced himself. The battle between light and darkness had begun, and the fate of all hung in the balance. The air in the crypt thickened with an unnatural chill as Father Aldrich faced the shadowy figure. The room pulsed with a malevolent energy, darkness swirling like a living storm. The flickering candles around the altar cast grotesque shadows on the cold stone walls, making the chamber feel like a cage closing in on him. Aldrich raised his crucifix high, his voice ringing with power and conviction as he recited the ancient exorcism prayers. The words, long forgotten by most, were a fragile shield against the abyss. The figure snarled, a sound like cracking bones, and lunged forward. Aldrich stepped back, narrowly avoiding the cold grasp that seemed to seek his very soul. The air shimmered with spectral light as the two forces collided. Holy faith against ancient evil. Memories of the village's suffering flashed before Aldrich's eyes. The broken families, the children who never grew old, the crops that withered overnight. He knew he fought not just for himself, but for every soul trapped beneath the shadow of the curse. The figure twisted and morphed, its form shifting between human and beast, an unholy amalgamation of nightmare. It hissed threats in a language Aldrich could not understand but felt in his bones, a promise of death and despair. Drawing upon the last reserves of his strength, Aldrich intoned louder, calling upon the saints and angels for protection. His voice cracked with exertion, but never wavered. Light began to emanate from the crucifix, a brilliant glow pushing back the surrounding darkness. The shadow recoiled, shrieking in rage. With a sudden furious surge, it lunged again, but this time Aldrich was ready. He thrust the crucifix forward, and the light exploded, a blinding force that shattered the darkness like glass. For a moment, silence. The air was still, heavy with the scent of burnt sulfur and old stone. The figure dissolved into a mist, retreating to the depths of the crypt. But Aldrich knew this battle was far from over. He sank to his knees, exhausted but resolute. The ritual had bought time, but the curse was ancient and cunning. The sleeper still waited beneath the earth, its power growing with every passing day. Outside, the first pale light of dawn seeped through the broken windows, casting long shadows across the cold floor. Aldrich rose slowly, eyes burning with determination. He had confronted the darkness, but the war was just beginning. The road from the crypt led north through winding forest paths, where fog clung like a second skin, and shadows moved without source. Father Aldrich rode his black steed in silence, his cloak wet with morning dew and ash. The events in the crypt had shaken him, yet his purpose had only grown stronger. 3 days had passed since the confrontation beneath Black Abbey. The villagers had seen the change, the temporary calm in the air, the absence of whispers in the night. But Aldrich knew it was a lull, not an end. He had spent nights poring over ancient texts, following the tangled threads of history. One name kept appearing in connection with the curse: Sanctum Silentius, the monastery of silent bells. A forgotten place nestled high in the cliffs near the eastern coast, where monks once worshipped in silence and kept secrets never meant to be shared. The monastery had vanished from maps centuries ago, wiped out during the war between the crown and the rebellion. Legend said it had been built atop an older pagan temple, and its bells had not rung since the last abbot disappeared. But Aldrich had found references in the margins of a scorched manuscript. Where silence lingers, the veil grows thin. On the fourth morning, he reached the cliffside path. The wind howled like mourning spirits, and the sea below roared with fury. The ruins of the monastery appeared like ghostly spires through the mist, stone arches broken by time, ivy crawling like veins across the walls, and the great bell tower stood intact. Yet no sound had come from it in over 300 years. Aldrich dismounted and walked the final steps alone, his boots crunching over ancient gravel. The wooden doors of the monastery hung ajar, untouched by storm or vandal. He crossed the threshold, and silence swallowed him whole. Inside, dust floated like souls in limbo. The walls bore faded murals, angels battling demons, monks kneeling before a blinding light, and a central figure draped in crimson robes holding a black flame. Aldrich paused at the image. It had no name, but its eyes seemed to follow him. The air was colder here, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The monastery reeked of something old and watching. He could feel the pressure behind the silence, as though the very stones were waiting to speak. As Aldrich moved deeper into the sanctuary, he discovered a staircase leading below. Moss-covered and slick, the steps spiraled downward into darkness. He lit a lantern and descended. What he found beneath chilled him. A circular chamber, perfectly intact, bones arranged in a circle surrounding a stone dais. On the dais, a manuscript, bound in skin, its cover marked with both the Christian cross and ancient runes. Nearby, a cracked chalice filled with dried blood. He approached carefully, every instinct warning him. The book was the Liber Tenebris, the Book of Shadows, forbidden, lost since the early Crusades, said to contain rites for binding and releasing things not of this world. Opening it, Aldrich read passages in Latin, pages describing rituals for calling the sleeper beneath the stones. The same title whispered in the Black Abbey's crypt. Suddenly the silence broke. The bell rang. Once, a low, trembling sound so deep it seemed to vibrate the bones in his chest. Then again and again. 3 tolls. Aldrich dropped the book and ran up the steps. The sound grew louder, distorted, unnatural. Not metal striking metal, but like a scream buried beneath the toll. He burst into the courtyard just as the bell tower's top split open. A black shape spilled forth, twisting like smoke, trailing claws and screaming mouths. It soared into the clouds, blotting out the weak sun. Aldrich fell to his knees, staring in horror. He hadn't just found the source of the curse, he had awakened it. Rain lashed the cliffside, and lightning clawed the heavens like divine rage. Father Aldrich fled the monastery's ruins, soaked to the bone, his lantern shattered and useless. Behind him, the twisted shape he had unleashed hovered above the abbey, folding and unfolding in midair like a nightmare given wings. He dared not look back again. By nightfall, Aldrich had returned to the village of Bracken Hollow. The streets were deserted, windows boarded, and doors barred. The villagers had seen the sky blacken, had heard the bells, and they knew. The curse had returned louder than ever. Aldrich entered the rectory, barely able to stand. He collapsed to his knees before the crucifix, his lips trembling with prayer. Domini libera nos ab tenebris. But deep inside, he knew this was no longer about exorcism. It was a reckoning. He had torn open a wound in the veil between worlds, and now the ancient horror had stepped through, not as a spirit to be banished, but as a revenant, a walking memory of something older than God's church. The next morning he awoke to silence again, but it was no longer peaceful. Outside the air was thick with dread. The livestock had fled, birds no longer sang, and the ground itself seemed colder. Aldrich walked to the chapel and found black feathers scattered across the pews. A mark was etched into the altar, not carved, but burned. A spiral curling in on itself like a vortex. He recognized it. The same mark had appeared in the Liber Tenebris, a sigil of anchoring, used to tether a spirit to a physical place. The revenant had not only awakened, it had claimed the village. From that day on, the haunting began. Children whispered about the man with the split mouth staring through windows. Animals were found mutilated in ritual circles. At night, villagers heard the tolling of bells, even though there were none left. Fires refused to light. Wells turned black, and one by one, the villagers began to change. Not all at once, but gradually. Eyes grew dull, speech slowed. They forgot things, names, prayers, even loved ones. They walked as if dreaming. Aldrich watched helplessly as his flock slipped into a fog from which none returned. Desperate, he sought answers. In the rectory's basement, he uncovered the journals of Father Henrik, the abbey's last exorcist, who vanished a century ago. The final entry was half burned, smeared with wax and blood. It is not a demon, it is memory itself. The church calls it blasphemy. I call it what came before. It has no name, only echoes. You cannot banish it. You must sever its anchor, destroy the place it calls home, even if that means burning holy ground. Aldrich reeled. Destroy the church? It went against everything he'd ever believed. But if the Black Abbey had become the heart of the Revenant's tether, then it had to be done. That night he returned to the abbey with oil and fire. He crossed the threshold for the last time. The statues wept blood. The murals had changed. The crimson figure now held the church itself, a flame in its hands. The bell tower loomed overhead like a silent witness. Aldrich poured the oil across the pews and lit the flame. As fire roared through the sanctuary, the Revenant appeared, not above, but before him. It had no face, only a swirling void, and within it he saw visions of monks kneeling in fear, of sacrifices made beneath the altar, of an ancient god fed by faith and silence. Its voice was thought, not sound. You are too late. I was born in the silence between prayers. Aldrich raised his crucifix and screamed verses of flame. The Revenant shrieked, not in pain, but rage. As the roof caved in, Aldrich felt a burning hand clutch his chest, pressing a mark into his flesh. He screamed, fell, and everything went black. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the absence of everything. No birds, no wind, no heartbeat. The air was still, the world gray. Smoke coiled around him like the breath of some sleeping beast. He was lying on the ground, surrounded by the smoldering ruins of the Black Abbey. The crucifix had fallen beside him, warped and blackened. The flames had died. but the scent of ash and burnt stone clung to the air. The abbey was no more, just a skeleton of charred pillars and collapsed beams. Aldrich sat up, wincing, his chest burned. He looked down. There, branded into his flesh, was the spiral, the revenant's mark, not a wound, not a scar. A living, pulsing sigil that seemed to hum with every breath. He touched it and saw visions of the old monks chanting in circles, of something vast and hungry beneath the church floor, whispering through stone. He reeled back in horror. He was marked, claimed, but he was not dead. Somehow he had survived. And that meant the revenant wasn't done. Perhaps it couldn't kill him. Perhaps it needed him as a vessel, as a voice, as a doorway. He stood trembling and looked out over the cliff. The sea was still. The village in the distance was wrapped in mist, unnaturally still, like a photograph taken from a dream. The people were still there, still lost, still fading. The burning of the abbey had done something. The silence had deepened, the darkness drawn in closer. The revenant had not been destroyed. It had retreated into him. For the next few days, Aldrich wandered. He was a ghost among ruins. The villagers barely looked at him, their eyes glazed, mouths slightly open as if trying to remember how to speak. No one answered when he knocked. No one prayed. One night, he returned to the rectory to find the walls scribbled in ink, not his own handwriting, but symbols and words from the Liber Tenebrae, written over and over in circles. I speak for what remembers. I speak for what sleeps. I speak for what waits. He had no memory of writing it. Aldrich knew he was losing himself. The revenant was not merely possessing him, it was rewriting him, shaping him into something new. But he refused to surrender. He spent hours meditating, fasting, praying. He scoured the remaining church texts for clues, anything that could sever the bond. Finally, in an old wooden drawer behind the altar, he found a relic, a shard of obsidian, bound in silver. Beneath it, a Latin note, lapis clausurae, the stone of severing, use only in sacrifice, a blade. He stared at it, realization dawning. To sever the revenant's hold, he would have to sever the part of himself that it lived in. That night, Aldrich went to the cliff where the abbey had stood. He knelt beneath the broken cross that once topped the bell tower. In one hand, he held the obsidian shard, in the other, his crucifix. He closed his eyes, not as a priest, not as a warrior cue, but as a man who remembers light. With a deep breath, he pressed the shard to his chest. Pain exploded through him. The spiral sizzled, flared, and then screamed. It was not his scream. It was the revenant's, ripping through his soul like torn parchment. He fell back, convulsing. Shadows poured from his mouth like smoke. The stone in his hand burned white hot. And then silence. True silence. Not absence, not emptiness, peace. When Aldrich opened his eyes, the mark was gone. The revenant had been expelled, not destroyed, but unmoored. No longer tied to him or the abbey. It had become a wandering thing again, lost and voiceless. But Aldrich knew it would not be gone forever. He buried the obsidian beneath the broken cross, and then he walked, away from Bracken Hollow, away from the ruins, into the dawn. He would go where the church feared to tread, to the east, to the old catacombs, to the deserts where saints had gone mad. He would find others like him, because somewhere out there, the revenant was seeking a new home. The desert was not empty. Father Aldrich learned this on the 4th day of his journey, beneath a white sun and a sky that looked bleached of all memory. He had wandered east, away from Bracken Hollow, across barren hills and salt flats that cracked beneath his feet. His only companion was the wind, until he heard voices. Whispers, just at the edge of hearing. They came not from ahead or behind, but from within, like echoes bouncing inside his skull. They spoke in no language he knew, yet he understood them, not with his mind, but with something deeper, older. He followed the sound and found the pilgrims. They were kneeling in a circle in the sand, 12 figures in gray hooded robes, their hands clasped in silent prayer. Their faces were hidden, but Aldrich saw their mouths moving, lips barely parting. They whispered in unison, their voices too soft to decipher. As he approached, none of them looked up. "Who are you?" he asked. No answer. The whispers continued. "Are you monks?" Still, no response. But one of them held out a hand, and in the palm was a small stone tablet, etched with symbols Aldrich recognized from Liber Tenebris, the whispering script. He took the tablet. The whispers inside him grew louder. Suddenly he understood. These were not monks. They were vessels, wanderers, who had given themselves to the old language, the pre-human tongue that had once been used to bind the revenants. They were living conduits, mouths for the forgotten. One of them rose and gestured for him to follow. Together they descended into a narrow ravine, carved into the earth like a scar. At the bottom was a doorway, stone, ancient, sealed with rusted iron. Overhead, the rock bore the sigil of the spiral. This was not over. Inside the door was a stairwell, descending into darkness. The pilgrims lit no torches, yet they walked with ease, as if they could see without sight. Aldrich followed deeper and deeper, until the air turned cold and the wind died entirely. At last, the staircase opened into a vast underground chamber. It was a cathedral, buried beneath the sands. Pillars of black stone rose from floor to ceiling, carved with thousands of whispering marks. In the center was a well of silence, a pit that seemed to drink sound itself. The pilgrims gathered around it and knelt again. One by one they began to weep. Aldrich watched, unmoving. Something in him knew this place, though he had never seen it before. The architecture, the script, the symbols, all echoed what he'd seen beneath the Black Abbey. This was older, purer. He stepped toward the pit and looked down. It wasn't just a hole, it was an eye, staring back. And for the first time since the burning of the abbey, Aldrich heard the revenant's voice again. "You cast me out, but I remain. I was born here, in silence. I am not one thing. I am all forgotten things. Every prayer left unanswered, every grave unmarked, every truth buried beneath obedience." Aldrich stumbled back, shaking. The eye blinked, and the pilgrims screamed, all at once, their mouths gaping in perfect unison. The sound was like glass breaking inside his head. He collapsed, clutching his ears. Then to silence again. When he opened his eyes, the pilgrims were standing. Each of them turned to him. One stepped forward, an old woman beneath the hood, her eyes hollowed by black ink. She placed something in his hand, a key, shaped like the spiral. Then she spoke with a voice like dry leaves. "You must return to where it was first bound. The abbey was the second gate. The first still sleeps." Aldrich tried to speak, but his mouth was numb. "Return? Back to the west? Back to the forest? Back to the original gate?" The woman nodded as if reading his thoughts. "If you do not bind it again, it will find another voice, and this time it will not whisper, it will sing." The other pilgrims began chanting again, the sound low and rhythmic, echoing through the buried cathedral like the pulse of a dead god. Aldrich looked down at the key. It glowed faintly in the dark. He knew what he had to do. Father Aldrich traveled west. He crossed the salt flats and broken earth, returned to the forest where dead leaves whispered beneath his boots. The key burned cold in his pocket, not hot, but cold, like frost made of sorrow. With each step, he felt time pulling backward, unspooling. He was walking into history. On the 7th night, he reached the ruins. Not the Black Abbey. No, this place was older, so old that the trees dared not grow close. A stone foundation lay half buried under moss and soil, the remnants of a building with no name. Even the wind passed around it, in silence. In the center stood the gate. Not a door, not a doorway, but a frame, carved from black stone, the same kind he had seen in the buried cathedral. It hummed faintly, and Aldrich could feel it deep in his bones, like a second heartbeat. He knelt before it. The key, shaped like the spiral, began to tremble. "This was where it began," whispered the revenant. "Before the monks, before the abbey, before prayer had names, this is where I came through." Aldrich held up the key. The frame responded, a flicker of light moving across its surface like oil. The spiral etched into the key began to rotate slowly, turning of its own accord. The ground shook. The gate was waking. A gust of wind erupted from the frame, carrying the scent of grave dust and old parchment. Voices rose from beneath the earth, not whispers, but names, hundreds of names, the forgotten, the unburied, the unheard. Then the frame opened, not outward, but inward, as if the air folded upon itself. What lay beyond was not a place, but a void, shifting darkness like a storm made of memory. A presence stirred there, ancient, immense, and watching. "Bind me again, priest," said the revenant, "if you can." Aldrich stepped forward. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the binding relics, the last 3 blessed items from the abbey's reliquary: the ashen rosary, the vow of silence, and the thorn of St. Ioseph. One by one, he placed them in the soil around the gate. The ground accepted them like hungry mouths. The spiral key pulsed. Aldrich began the rite. By name unspoken, by word unbroken, by faith in silence, Abi returned to the hollow. The wind howled. The darkness beyond the gate rippled as if in pain. "By thorn and vow, by ash and light, I bind you back to stillness." The ground cracked. The frame blazed with symbols. The whispering script, burning with pale fire. The relics sank deeper into the earth, leaving behind only silence. "You bind one name," came the revenant's voice, "but I wear many." From the void came figures, shapes of shadow, dozens of them, stepping through the gate like smoke taking form. Some bore faces Aldrich recognized, monks long dead, villagers from Bracken Hollow, even his own father. They advanced. He held his ground. "I see you, I name you, I deny you." Each word struck like thunder. The first of the shades staggered. A second screamed and fell. The spiral key spun faster, rising in the air. The light grew brighter, but the last figure, the largest, did not fall. It was the child, the one from the abbey, the one who had burned and smiled. She stepped forward, her dress smoldering with black flame, her eyes pits of endless night. "You abandoned me," she said, "left me in the dark." Aldrich trembled. He remembered her, the girl who had wandered into the abbey the night before the fire, the one he failed to protect. "You could have saved me." "I tried," he whispered. "Liar." She raised her hand. Shadows surged toward him like a wave. Aldrich dropped to his knees, not in fear, but prayer. He pressed his forehead to the soil. "By the name I have forgotten, I ask for forgiveness." The wave struck and stopped. The girl paused, her hand lowered. Something shimmered around Aldrich. A glow of soft light, not from relics, not from magic, but from remorse. A light made of truth. The gate pulsed. The child blinked. Then she turned and walked back into the darkness. The other shades followed, silent. One by one, they returned to the void, to where they had come from. And as the last shade crossed the gate, the spiral key snapped in two. The frame turned to stone once more. Aldrich collapsed. The wind died, and the world was quiet. Aldrich awoke in darkness. He lay curled among roots and leaves, the broken spiral key clutched in his hand. Around him the gate had crumbled into dust, and the relics were gone, swallowed by the earth as if they had never existed. His body ached. His voice was hoarse, but he was alive. And something was different. The silence wasn't empty. It was clean. No whispers, No hidden breath behind the trees. The gate had been closed and the souls returned. But Aldrich knew that was only one gate. There were others. He stood, his legs trembling, and looked to the east, to the mountains where the snow never melted. That was where the second gate would be, where the next binding must happen. He gathered what remained of his strength and began walking. Meanwhile, in Bracken Hollow, the town had changed. The villagers whispered less and watched more. At night, dogs growled at shadows that passed too fast to be seen. The priest who had replaced Aldrich was a younger man named Father Marin, kind but nervous. He had already lost sleep to dreams of hands reaching up from the church floor, and in the chapel basement, the cracks had returned. Hairline fractures in the stone, creeping like veins. They pulsed faintly, like something underneath was breathing. One night a boy disappeared. 6-year-old Willem, last seen playing near the bell tower, vanished without a sound. A search party found only his shoes, placed neatly at the chapel threshold. The villagers said nothing. But one woman, blind since birth, spoke aloud in the market square. The dead don't walk anymore. They float now, like smoke, and they know our names. Back in the forest, Aldrich moved through the trees like a ghost of his own. He ate little, drank less, and spoke only to the spirits that lingered near old stones and forgotten paths. They did not speak back, not in words, but he could feel their presence, and they were watching. On the third night, he built a fire. As he sat before it, something stirred in the shadows beyond its light. A shape, a man, or something close to it. He wore a plague doctor's mask, long, bird-like, made of bone. His robes were stitched from old clerical garments, torn and re-sewn into patchwork. In one hand, he carried a lantern. Its flame was green. He stepped into the firelight. "Father Aldrich," the figure said, "I've been watching you." Aldrich did not reach for his blade. He had none left. "Who are you?" "An archivist," the masked figure replied. "A record keeper, a witness." "To what?" "To the unraveling." Aldrich stared into the mask's hollow eyes. "Do you serve the abbey?" The figure chuckled. It sounded like dry leaves. "I serve the truth, Father, and it is bleeding through your prayers." Aldrich stood. "Did you open the first gate?" "No," said the archivist, "but I watched it open, and I saw what came through." He walked to the fire, held out a parchment scroll, sealed in wax the color of blood. "There are 5 gates. 1 you've closed. 4 remain. But time is unraveling. You cannot close them all." Aldrich took the scroll. "What's inside?" "Names, maps, songs of binding. Some older than the abbey. Some from before the faith had a name." Aldrich paused. "Why help me?" The archivist tilted his head. "Because I've read what happens if you fail." And then he turned, walking back into the woods. The lantern swung, the green flame flickered, and then nothing, only the wind. That night, Aldrich opened the scroll. It was written in a hand not quite human, sharp, geometric, with lines that pulsed faintly when touched. He read names he could not pronounce, places erased from maps, symbols that ached behind the eyes. At the very bottom was a question. "Do you remember what you promised?" Aldrich stared at those words for a long time, and he did. He remembered standing in the abbey garden long ago beside a child dying from plague. He had promised God, and more than God, that if he could save just one soul, he would give his life to the silence between prayers. He had been answered, but the cost had been wrong. He felt it now, the weight of broken promises, of ash scattered on sacred ground. He could not undo what had been done, but he could go on. Aldrich placed the scroll in his satchel, looked once more to the east, and whispered, "Then let it be done." And he walked into the darkness. The road to the eastern mountains was silent, not because no one traveled it, but because even the birds feared to sing. Aldrich followed a path choked by mist, worn by time and blood. The scroll the archivist had given him grew colder as he neared the first marker, an ancient standing stone carved with runes so old they had no language, only feeling, fear, longing, betrayal. He knelt before it and laid a hand on its surface. It trembled beneath his fingers, and then he heard it, a low hum, deep and distant. At first he thought it was wind, but wind does not carry melody. It was a song. The notes were slow, mournful, like something meant to be heard underground, bones singing to bones. Aldrich remembered the scroll's phrase, songs of binding. He followed the sound through a narrow pass where the air grew colder with each step. The mist thickened, and shadows moved with minds of their own. There were no trees here, only stone, rising like broken teeth from the ground. And at the heart of the pass, a pit. It was perfectly round, wide enough to swallow a wagon. From its depths came the song, clearer now, louder. It echoed as though sung by a choir of the dead. Aldrich sat at its edge and listened. The melody shifted. It no longer mourned, it warned. And as it did, the fog rippled. Figures emerged, not from the pit, but from the mist itself. Human-shaped, but too tall. Their limbs bent at wrong angles. Where faces should be, there were only smoothed-over hollows, like melted wax. The Song of Bones had called them. Aldrich rose slowly. He no longer carried a weapon, but he held the scroll like a blade. "Speak your name," he whispered, "or return to ash." The nearest figure tilted its head. A voice came, not from a mouth, but from the space between its shoulders. "We are the woken silent, bound once, broken now." Another voice from another. "You wear the promise of the exorcist, but your blood is old, tainted." A third behind him. "What will you trade, priest of rot? What will you offer to bind what should never wake?" Aldrich swallowed. "Only what I have left." He opened the scroll. The runes upon it shifted, shimmered. One by one, the figures hissed and stepped back. The scroll pulsed with green light, the same as the archivist's lantern, and a wind rose, howling from the pit. Aldrich began to speak the words written in blood-red ink. The language cut his throat. Every syllable felt like glass dragged across bone. But he continued, and the figures screamed. They twisted, their limbs folding inward, their hollow faces cracked. From within each came not blood, but dust, pouring out like smoke caught in wind. Aldrich stepped forward, voice raw, scroll burning in his hands. "By silence, by ash, by the hand that signs beneath the earth, I bind you." The pit roared, and then silence. The figures were gone. Aldrich collapsed. The scroll was ash in his hands, its power spent. But the pit had closed. Stone had risen to seal it, smooth and unmarked, as if it had never been there. He lay there, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the sky. It had grown darker, not with storm, but with something deeper, like the world itself was holding its breath. One gate more, 3 remain, and now the voices would follow him, because binding had a cost, and he had not yet paid it. Night fell on the northern edge of the world, and with it came a stillness so profound it felt like a held breath, the earth waiting for something. Aldrich, weary and still bruised from the binding at the eastern pit, arrived at the edge of the stone-lace moor, where the ground shimmered like cracked glass, and the air smelled faintly of rust and ash. He was no longer alone. Since the last binding, he'd begun to feel them. The bound, whispering at the corners of his vision, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in the sound of leaves brushing stone. Voices not his, but now somehow within him. They were not cruel, but they were watching, and they remembered. The third gate was not marked by ruins, but by absence. No birds, no wind, no echoes. Even Aldrich's own footsteps seemed quieter here, like sound itself was unwilling to trespass. He reached the heart of the moor. a sunken depression in the ground, filled with stagnant water blacker than night. In its center, rising from the pool, stood a twisted iron lantern, a beacon that burned upward, its flame curling into the sky, as though trying to return to the stars. But it gave no light. The archivist had warned him about this place. "The lantern is not for seeing," she had said. "It is for remembering." Remembering what? What was done here? What was buried in the name of silence? As Aldrich approached, the flame flared in reverse, sucking shadows into itself. His own reflection in the water distorted, not like ripples, but like something beneath the surface was rearranging him, piece by piece. He stared at the lantern and whispered the activation rite. Nothing happened. He repeated it louder. Still nothing, till the third attempt. Then the lantern screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a memory forced through a mouth that had never been made for speech. The moor trembled. The water boiled. The flame of the lantern twisted tighter and tighter until it became a narrow spear of black fire. And then it struck the ground, opening a rift. Aldrich stumbled back. From the rift crawled a creature. No, a man. No, something in between. He was cloaked in layers of priestly robes, scorched and rotted, his face a mass of melted features and eyes stitched shut with wire. He held a bell. The sound of it rippled outward, turning the grass to ash. With each toll, the earth cracked deeper. Aldrich realized who he faced, or what. The bellkeeper of the forbidden liturgy. Long ago, the abbey had cast him out. A monk who delved too deep, read scrolls never meant to be seen, and saying prayers meant not for God, but for things beneath him. They had sealed him here, and now the lantern had remembered. "You're not supposed to be free," Aldrich said, gripping his coat to steady his shaking hands. "Nor are you," the bellkeeper rasped. "Yet here we are, priest of regret." The bellkeeper raised his bell. Aldrich reached for the final scroll, the one he had hoped never to use. It was bound in skin, stitched with silver thread. The ritual it contained was not one of binding, but of undoing. If he spoke these words, he would erase not only the bellkeeper, but also every memory tied to the moor, including his own. It would be a sacrifice of self. The bellkeeper moved. Reality bent. Time faltered. Aldrich opened the scroll. He spoke the unwords, syllables forbidden not because they summoned evil, but because they unraveled what had once been good. The bellkeeper shrieked, not in pain, but in triumph. "Yes, speak it. Let the moor drink your name." The lantern exploded in a column of inverted light. Aldrich's mind fractured. He forgot. He forgot his name. He forgot the abbey. He forgot why he was here. But he did not stop. His voice echoed louder than the bell, and as the last word fell from his lips, the bellkeeper dissolved. Robes first, then flesh, then bone, until only ash and the toll of the bell remained. And then that too was gone. Aldrich fell to his knees. The scroll burned away, leaving no trace. The moor was silent again. The lantern was gone. Even the pit had sealed over, replaced by heather and wind. He stood up. He looked at his hands. He didn't know his name, but he still knew one thing. There were 2 gates left, and something was calling him onward. Something that had waited a long time. Something that had once worn his face. When Aldrich awoke, the sun was high and colorless, shining down on a wide open field of bone-white grass. There were no clouds, no birds, and no memory of how he had come here. Only the sound of wind whispering in a language he no longer recognized. He touched his chest. His talisman was gone. So was the scroll. So was his name. He stood slowly, hands trembling. His coat was still damp from the moor, but the moor was gone. There was only this field now, stretching forever, and at the center of it, a tree. It was unlike any tree he had ever seen. Its bark shimmered like mercury, smooth and reflective, and its leaves were slivers of mirrored glass that caught the light and scattered it in thousands of directions. It didn't cast a shadow. It collected them. The tree pulsed, and in its trunk, a hollow mirror-like oval that showed not his reflection, but another version of himself, pale, wild-eyed, whispering words with no sound. Aldrich approached. The mirrored figure did the same. Suddenly, pain stabbed behind his eyes. A flood of memories surged forward, but they were not his. Children laughing, fires in the abbey, hands dragging him through snow, a voice chanting in a dead tongue, and then a question, whispered not into his ear, but into his bones. "You wish to remember?" Aldrich clutched his skull. What was taken from me?" The tree didn't answer, but the wind grew louder. The mirrored leaves began to vibrate, creating a choir of shimmering tones, and slowly, around the base of the tree, faces began to form, trapped within the bark, pressing outwards, mouths frozen in terror. The bound, the ones he had sealed, they were here, watching him, waiting. One face emerged fully, a boy no older than 15, his eyes weeping silver. "You made me forget my mother," the boy said. "You erased her so I wouldn't scream." Another, a woman, aged, her mouth sewn shut. "You told us it was mercy." A third, a priest with burning eyes. "You feared what we saw." Aldrich stepped back. I tried to save you." The mirror in the tree shimmered violently. His reflection began to split and fracturing into dozens of Aldrichs, each one older, colder, more disfigured. One had no mouth, another wore the bellkeeper's robes, a third was nothing but flame. He realized they were all versions of him, from other choices, other timelines, other sins. "Who am I?" he whispered. The tree pulsed again, and then it opened. The mirrored portal widened, the bark peeling back like wet paper. Beyond it, not darkness, but a room, familiar, stone walls, candles in brass holders. The abbey's sanctum of initiates, his beginning. Aldrich stepped through. He was no longer in the field. He stood again in that sacred chamber, younger, uncertain, and holding a book with no title. All around him were students in robes. They chanted in unison, eyes closed. He turned and saw himself again, older now, as he had been before the first binding. The two versions of him stared at one another. The younger spoke. "You came back. Why?" "Because I forgot why I started." The elder stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then remember." And just like that, the tree was gone. The vision vanished. He stood once more in the field, but this time he remembered everything. His name, Aldrich Valiant. His mission to stop the nameless choir from rising again. The bound, not victims, but anchors, holding a deeper darkness in place. Each seal was weakening. Each one he removed brought the choir closer to song. And yet he had no choice, because the final two gates were already bleeding into the waking world. He turned. The mirrored tree was now a withered black trunk. Its bark cracked, its leaves turned to ash. In the distance, a tower rose. He knew what it was. The penultimate gate, and the only place he ever swore he'd never return. The chamber of his brother's burial. Aldrich stood before the towering spires of Black Abbey, its dark silhouette cutting sharply against the gray sky. The once grand fortress now lay in ruin, shattered by decades of war and shadow. But tonight, beneath the weight of a blood-red moon, the ancient stones hummed with a terrible light. Inside the deepest crypt, where no light dared enter, the last gate awaited. The chamber was lined with carved reliefs of angels and demons locked in eternal battle. Candles flickered weakly, their flames bending away from the cold that filled the air. In the center, a massive iron door sealed with sigils of binding and protection. Aldrich drew his sword, a relic from his earliest days, its blade forged with prayers and holy water. He stepped forward, chanting the ancient rites that had been passed down through generations of exorcists. The air thickened, whispers rose from the shadows, voices of the lost, the damned, the forgotten. They called to him, promising power, salvation, oblivion. His heart ached for the brother he had lost, the boy who had been swallowed by darkness so many years ago. With a cry, Aldrich plunged the sword into the iron door. The runes glowed violently, and the door shattered into shards of shadow and flame. Beyond was a chamber of endless blackness, pierced only by a single flickering candle. There, suspended in the void, was the nameless choir, a swirling mass of twisted souls bound by a hatred that transcended time. Their song was a roar of anguish and fury, shaking the very foundations of the world. Aldrich raised his voice, reciting the exorcism prayer of Saint Benedict, calling upon the power of light to sever the chains that bound them. The choir surged forward, a tempest of despair and malice, but the holy light cut through the darkness, banishing shadows with every syllable. The battle raged, between light and dark, faith and despair, hope and oblivion. In the final moment, as Aldrich's strength waned, a hand grasped his shoulder. Turning, he saw the ghostly form of his brother, eyes clear and free. "It's over," his brother whispered. "You have freed us all." The choir song faded, the black void dissolved, and dawn broke over Black Abbey. Aldrich fell to his knees, exhausted but triumphant. The curse was lifted, the souls were at peace, and the abbey, though scarred, would live on as a beacon of hope against the darkness. The first light of dawn spilled weakly through the shattered windows of Black Abbey, casting fractured patterns on the cold stone floor. Aldrich, still kneeling where he had fallen, felt the weight of exhaustion pressing deep into his bones. The echoes of the nameless choir's fading cries still lingered in his ears, but with them came a strange, heavy silence. He rose slowly, muscles aching, and turned his gaze toward the ruined halls. The abbey, once a sanctuary of faith, had become a battleground for forces far older and darker than the petty wars of men. And now, with the curse lifted, the true battle was only beginning. Aldrich's thoughts drifted back to the letter he had found in the bishop's study, an ancient parchment stained with age and blood, hinting at a secret buried deep beneath the abbey's foundations. A secret older than the abbey itself, tied to the land's dark history and the horrors that had plagued the region for centuries. With trembling hands, he unfolded the fragile paper. The script was barely legible, written in a mixture of Latin and an archaic dialect he barely recognized, but the meaning was clear enough. A hidden chamber, sealed by powerful magic, contained the root of the darkness. Determined to uncover the truth, Aldrich gathered what little strength he had left and ventured deeper into the labyrinthine catacombs beneath the abbey. The air grew colder with every step, the shadows twisting unnaturally, as if alive. The flicker of his torch revealed faded frescoes depicting scenes of war, plague, and despair. Among them, a disturbing image caught his eye. A robed figure standing before a great gate, its face obscured by shadow, clutching a bloodied chalice. Beneath the fresco, a cryptic inscription read, "He who drinks the cursed blood awakens the eternal night." The weight of the words sank into Aldrich's heart. Was this the source of the evil that had haunted Black Abbey for generations? Had someone, long ago, willingly unleashed the darkness in a desperate bid for power? As he pressed onward, the corridors narrowed and the silence thickened. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath his feet, and a low guttural growl echoed from the depths. From the shadows emerged a creature of nightmares, an abomination forged from man and demon, its eyes glowing with malice. Aldrich raised his sword, the prayers of exorcism spilling from his lips as steel met flesh in a clash that shook the very foundations of the abbey. The fight was brutal and unforgiving, but Aldrich's faith was his shield. With a final piercing strike, the creature dissolved into smoke and shadow, leaving only a lingering sense of dread. Breathing heavily, Aldrich continued, his resolve steeled by the horrors he had faced. Somewhere in the depths lay the truth, and with it, the key to ending the nightmare once and for all. The winding corridors of the catacombs grew narrower and darker as Aldrich pressed onward, each step echoing ominously against ancient stone walls. The faint flicker of his torch cast long, trembling shadows that danced like restless spirits on the damp surfaces. The air was thick with the scent of decay, mingled with something faintly metallic, like old blood. Despite his weariness, Aldrich's determination burned brighter than ever. He clutched the ancient parchment tightly in one hand, the cryptic inscription haunting his thoughts. Somewhere beneath the abbey lay the chamber, the source of the curse that had blighted the land for centuries. Suddenly the passage opened into a vast cavern. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth from the ceiling, and the ground was uneven, littered with broken bones and crumbling relics. At the center, half buried in dust and debris, stood a colossal stone door, etched with arcane symbols, glowing faintly in the torchlight. Aldrich stepped closer, tracing the inscriptions with a trembling finger. The language was unfamiliar, but the symbols pulsed with dark power, whispering secrets in a voice only the soul could hear. Drawing on every ounce of courage and faith, Aldrich began the incantation he had learned from the bishop's notes, a prayer to break the ancient seals. As his voice echoed through the chamber, the glowing symbols flared brightly and the heavy door rumbled. With a grinding sound that echoed like thunder, the stone door slowly creaked open, revealing a cold, shadow-filled chamber beyond. Inside, the air was icy, and a suffocating darkness seemed to swallow all light. Aldrich stepped inside, his heart pounding. The chamber's walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty tomes and strange artifacts, relics of a long-forgotten cult. In the center, a stone altar stood stained with dried blood, surrounded by charred remnants of candles. As Aldrich approached the altar, he noticed a small, ornate box resting atop it. With careful hands, he opened it, revealing a dark red vial filled with a viscous liquid that shimmered unnaturally. A cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing his torch. In the sudden darkness, Aldrich felt a presence, ancient, malevolent, and hungry. The shadows coalesced into a form, a figure draped in tattered robes, eyes burning with infernal fire. It was the source of the curse, the demon lord who had once made a pact with the desperate souls of the land. "You have come far, priest," the demon hissed, voice like the grinding of stone. "But this is where your journey ends." Aldrich gripped his crucifix tightly, the only weapon that could repel such evil. "By the light of God, I banish you," he declared, his voice unwavering. The chamber erupted in a tempest of darkness and light as Aldrich's faith clashed with the demon's ancient power. The battle for the soul of the abbey and the fate of the village reached its terrifying climax. Aldrich stood firm in the heart of the hidden chamber, clutching his crucifix with trembling hands. The demon before him radiated an otherworldly darkness, its fiery eyes burning with centuries of malice. The oppressive cold wrapped around Aldrich like a shroud, threatening to suffocate the very breath from his lungs. The battle was not one of mere physical strength, but of spirit and will. The demon's voice echoed through the chamber, a sinister hiss that seemed to claw at the edges of Aldrich's resolve. "You cannot banish me, priest," it snarled. "This land is mine by ancient right. Your faith is but a flickering candle in a storm." Aldrich's grip tightened. He raised the crucifix high and began to chant the prayers of exorcism he had memorized during years of study. His voice grew stronger with every word, fueled by the hope of saving the village and breaking the curse once and for all. The demon writhed and shrieked as the power of Aldrich's faith pierced the shadows. The chamber trembled, dust falling from the ceiling like silent rain. The stone altar glowed faintly, reacting to the battle raging between light and darkness. Suddenly, the vial of red liquid shattered, spilling its contents onto the altar. A wave of dark energy surged from the spill, causing the demon to roar in agony. Aldrich seized the moment and advanced, reciting the final rites with fervor. "By the power of the Almighty, I command you to leave this place. Be gone, foul spirit!" The demon let out a blood-curdling scream as its form began to dissolve into the swirling shadows. The chamber brightened as the darkness receded, revealing the worn stone walls and forgotten relics in their true light. Aldrich fell to his knees, exhausted but victorious. The oppressive weight lifted from his chest, replaced by a peaceful calm. He knew the battle was won, but the scars of the curse would linger in the village's memory for generations. As he made his way back through the catacombs, Aldrich's thoughts turned to the people waiting above, the villagers who had suffered in silence. The dawn outside promised a new beginning, one free from the shadows of the past. Yet, somewhere deep within, Aldrich felt the faintest chill. The battle had been fierce, but evil was never truly defeated. It waited patiently in the dark, ready to return when faith faltered. For now, though, the light had won. The sun had barely risen above the horizon when Aldrich emerged from the catacombs. The village lay silent, cloaked in the fragile quiet of dawn. Yet the serenity felt fragile, like the fragile glass that could shatter with the slightest tremor. Aldrich's footsteps echoed softly on the cobbled streets as he made his way toward the village square. The townsfolk were beginning to stir, their faces drawn with exhaustion and shadowed by weeks of fear. Mothers clutched their children tightly, while the elders exchanged wary glances. The exorcism had lifted the immediate darkness, but the wounds it left behind were deep. The villagers knew the demon had not come alone. There was something else, something hidden in the very soil of their land. Aldrich found himself drawn back to the old chronicles in the village church, desperate for answers. The ancient texts told of a war centuries ago when the castle atop the hill was a fortress of power and intrigue. It was said that a betrayal during the siege had cursed the land, unleashing a darkness that would lie dormant until the day the innocent would suffer once more. As Aldrich pored over the fragile parchment, a name caught his eye: Lady Eveline, the last keeper of the castle's secrets. Her story was whispered among the villagers like a ghostly legend. They said she vanished the night the castle fell, taking with her a hidden relic said to bind the darkness. Aldrich knew his fight was far from over. The demon was but a symptom, a shadow cast by the ancient curse. To save the village, he needed to uncover the truth buried beneath centuries of silence. Determined, he prepared to journey to the castle ruins, a place shunned by even the bravest. The path was treacherous, winding through dense forests and over jagged cliffs, but Aldrich's resolve was unyielding. As he packed his belongings, the church bell tolled, a somber reminder of the lives lost and the sacrifices yet to come. The villagers watched silently, their hope resting on the shoulders of the priest who dared to challenge the darkness itself. The air grew colder as Aldrich stepped outside the safety of the village. The forest loomed ahead, dark and ancient, its shadows whispering secrets of forgotten battles and restless spirits. He took a deep breath, gripping his crucifix tightly. This journey was not just for himself, but for every soul that had suffered under the curse. The castle awaited, and with it, the echoes of a forgotten past, ready to reveal their haunting truth. Aldrich's journey to the castle ruins was fraught with danger. The forest seemed alive, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs echoing like whispers from unseen eyes. Shadows shifted at the edge of his vision, and the cold seeped deep into his bones. Yet his faith and resolve pressed him onward. As the sun climbed higher, the ruined silhouette of the ancient fortress emerged through the trees. The castle, once a proud symbol of power, now stood broken and overgrown. Its stone walls crumbled and cloaked in creeping ivy. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten memories. Aldrich paused at the gate, clutching his crucifix tightly. The castle felt alive with a dark energy, an echo of the curse that had plagued the village for centuries. He stepped inside cautiously, every footfall stirring centuries of dust. The great hall was a cavernous space. Its ceiling collapsed in parts, letting streaks of pale sunlight illuminate the faded tapestries hanging limply on the walls. On the ancient hearth, blackened ashes whispered of long extinguished fires. Aldrich's eyes were drawn to a staircase winding upward into shadow. He felt an irresistible pull, as if the castle itself was calling him to uncover its secrets. He ascended slowly, each step creaking beneath his weight. At the top, a narrow corridor stretched ahead, lined with doors warped by time. Aldrich pushed open the first door, revealing a chamber filled with crumbling books and faded scrolls. Among them, he discovered a journal bound in cracked leather. Its pages were yellowed but legible, penned in the delicate script of Lady Eveline herself. As Aldrich read, the room seemed to grow colder. The journal told of a forbidden pact, a desperate bargain struck during the siege, when the castle's defenders turned to dark forces to repel their enemies. Lady Eveline wrote of a relic, a cursed amulet, said to contain the spirit of a vengeful demon. The journal's last entry was fragmented, hinting that Lady Eveline had hidden the amulet somewhere within the castle before her disappearance. Aldrich's heart pounded. If he could find this relic, he might unravel the curse that haunted his village. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed through the halls. A low, guttural whisper, almost like a voice. Aldrich gripped his crucifix tighter, stepping cautiously into the darkness beyond the corridor. The castle was alive with its own secrets, and Aldrich knew that each step forward would bring him closer to the darkness he had vowed to defeat. The whispering voices grew louder as Aldrich moved deeper into the castle's labyrinthine corridors. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of decay, and something far more sinister, a darkness that clung to the very stones beneath his feet. He reached the end of the narrow hallway and found a massive door, blackened by time and marked with strange symbols that seemed to writhe under his gaze. The iron handle was cold, almost icy to the touch. Aldrich steadied his breath and pushed the door open. Beyond lay a vast chamber, illuminated only by the faint glow of flickering candles. Shadows danced along the walls, their shapes twisting like living creatures. In the center of the room, a stone altar stood stained with dark crimson marks. Old blood, Aldrich thought, and the sickly sweet smell confirmed it. The walls were etched with arcane runes that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply. Aldrich felt an oppressive presence closing in around him. The shadows coalesced, forming a towering figure cloaked in darkness. Its eyes glowed with an unholy terror. "Who dares enter my domain?" a voice hissed, echoing through the chamber like 1,000 whispered curses. Aldrich raised his crucifix, its silver gleaming in the candlelight. "I am Aldrich, servant of the light. I come to end your evil." The dark figure laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the bones. "Many have tried, priest, and all have failed. Your faith will not save you here." Aldrich tightened his grip and began to pray aloud, invoking the holy names. The figure lunged forward, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Suddenly, the chamber erupted in a blinding flash. Aldrich felt a searing heat as light and shadow clashed violently. The altar cracked, releasing a wave of energy that pushed the darkness back. The demon howled in rage, retreating into the deepest corners of the room. Aldrich, breathing heavily, took a cautious step forward. Among the rubble, he spotted a small amulet, the cursed relic Lady Eveline had mentioned. Its dark surface pulsed faintly, alive with malevolent energy. Aldrich knew this was the key to breaking the curse, but it would come at a great cost. The battle was far from over, and the shadows of the castle still held many secrets yet to be uncovered. Aldrich's heart still pounded as he pocketed the cursed amulet. The chamber's oppressive darkness seemed to retreat, but the sinister weight lingered. He knew that the fight inside this room was only the beginning. Carefully, he examined the altar and the surrounding runes. They were ancient, older than any texts he had encountered in the monastery. The inscriptions hinted at forbidden knowledge, dark rituals performed long ago by those who sought power beyond mortal limits. As he traced the symbols with his fingers, a faint mechanism clicked. The altar shifted, revealing a narrow passage leading downward. Without hesitation, Aldrich lit a torch and descended into the cold, damp depths. The passage opened into a vast underground library, hidden beneath the castle for centuries. Shelves of dusty tomes lined the stone walls, their pages brittle with age. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and forgotten secrets. Aldrich's eyes searched the titles: books on demonology, necromancy, and arcane arts. One tome, bound in black leather and adorned with strange sigils, caught his attention. Its cover bore the name Liber Tenebris, the Book of Shadows. He carefully opened it, the pages filled with cryptic illustrations and incantations. The text described the origin of the demonic entity he had just confronted, known as Malachar, a fallen angel cast out during the wars of heaven and hell. According to the book, Malachar had once been a guardian of light, but ambition and wrath corrupted his soul. He had been bound to the castle by ancient seals, but the wars on the surface had weakened these bindings. The book also detailed a ritual to strengthen the seals, one that required a rare relic, the heart of Saint Cecilia, rumored to be hidden within the castle's deepest vaults. Aldrich's mind raced. He realized that to save the village and himself, he must find this relic and perform the ritual before Malachar could regain full power. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the library, a soft whisper like a breath of wind. Aldrich spun around, torch raised. The shadows flickered and he saw a figure emerge from the darkness. It was Lady Eveline. Her eyes were weary but resolute. "You found the hidden library," she said softly. "Few have ever seen it and lived to tell the tale." Aldrich nodded. "The heart of Saint Cecilia, is it real?" She smiled faintly. "More than real, but guarded by traps and dark magic. You must be prepared." Together they began to plan their next move. The battle against the darkness was far from over. The fate of the village and perhaps the world depended on what they would do next. The next morning, Aldrich and Lady Eveline prepared for their descent into the castle's deepest vaults. The air outside was cold and heavy, a thick mist clinging to the ancient stone walls as if the castle itself mourned what had transpired within. With torches in hand and weapons at their sides, they ventured into the labyrinthine corridors below the castle. Every step echoed through the silent passages, the only sound their breathing and the faint drip of water seeping from the stones. The path was treacherous. Dark magic and ancient traps guarded the way. Spiked pits concealed beneath loose stones, enchanted runes that triggered bursts of flame, and hidden arrow slits ready to release deadly projectiles. Aldrich's knowledge of scripture and Eveline's familiarity with the castle's history proved invaluable. Together they disabled the traps with a combination of holy prayers and careful observation, moving cautiously deeper into the darkness. Hours passed and the torchlight began to wane, shadows stretching like claws along the walls. Finally, they reached a massive iron door, covered with strange symbols and sealed shut by a complex lock. Eveline kneeled and began to chant in a forgotten tongue, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Slowly, the lock clicked open, the door creaking as it swung inward to reveal a chamber bathed in an eerie blue light. In the center stood a pedestal, and upon it lay a small heart-shaped relic glowing faintly, the heart of Saint Cecilia. Aldrich stepped forward, but a sudden chill swept through the room. The air grew thick and oppressive, and shadows coalesced into dark shapes swirling at the edges of the chamber. Malakar's presence was near. With no time to hesitate, Aldrich grasped the relic. The power within pulsed through his veins, a fierce warmth battling the cold dread creeping into his soul. Lady Eveline raised her sword, ready to confront whatever darkness emerged. Together they braced themselves for the final confrontation. The fate of the village, and perhaps the entire realm, hinged on what would come next. The eerie blue glow cast by the heart of Saint Cecilia barely illuminated the vast chamber. Aldrich's grip on the relic tightened as the shadows began to coalesce, forming a swirling mass of darkness that seemed alive, writhing, pulsating, and hungry. A terrible voice echoed through the room, deep and ancient, dripping with malice. "You dare trespass, priest. This domain belongs to Malakar, the eternal shadow." From the darkness emerged a figure, tall, clad in tattered black robes, his eyes burning with a crimson fire. The demon Malakar himself had returned. Aldrich raised the relic high, chanting prayers that rang through the chamber like holy thunder. Flames erupted around him, illuminating the room with bursts of golden light that pushed back the darkness. But Malakar advanced relentlessly. Lady Eveline stood by his side, sword gleaming as she prepared to strike. "We must hold him off. The relic's power is the only hope for the village." Malakar laughed, a sound like breaking bones, and unleashed a wave of shadowy tendrils that whipped through the air, striking the walls and floor. The stone cracked and crumbled, dust falling like ashes. Aldrich focused his prayers, calling upon the saints and angels to protect them. The relic pulsed, sending a radiant beam toward the demon. But Malakar absorbed the light, growing stronger. Desperation surged in Aldrich's heart. He realized the relic alone was not enough. The battle would demand everything, the faith, courage, and sacrifices they had yet to understand. Eveline lunged forward, sword slicing through tendrils, buying Aldrich precious seconds. "Find the altar, destroy it," she shouted. Aldrich's eyes darted around and spotted a stone altar at the far end of the chamber, covered in runes and dark stains. If the altar was the source of Malakar's power, destroying it might end the nightmare. As Malakar turned to face Eveline, Aldrich sprinted toward the altar, dodging shards of stone and bursts of shadow magic. The chamber trembled, threatening to collapse under the strain. Reaching the altar, Aldrich grasped a dagger that lay beside it, a relic once wielded by a holy warrior centuries ago. Chanting a final prayer, he plunged the blade deep into the altar. A blinding explosion of light filled the room, and Malakar screamed, his form unraveling like smoke in the wind. The shadow shattered, retreating into the cracks of the stones. When the light faded, the chamber was silent once more. Aldrich and Eveline stood panting, the heart of Saint Cecilia glowing steadily in Aldrich's hand. Outside, the first rays of dawn pierced the mist, promising a new beginning. But Aldrich knew the battle was far from over. The victory over Malakar's manifestation left Aldrich and Eveline drained but resolute. The ancient chamber's silence was now replaced by a somber weight. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Outside the castle walls, the villagers gathered cautiously, eyes wide with fear and hope. News of the exorcism had spread quickly, yet whispers of a greater darkness loomed like an impending storm. Aldrich descended from the depths of the fortress, the heart of St. Cecilia secured within his cloak. He addressed the trembling crowd. The evil that plagued us was but a fragment of a darker force. Malachar is banished for now, but his shadow stretches beyond these walls. Murmurs rippled through the villagers. Some clutched their crosses tighter. Others looked to the sky as if searching for answers in the clouds. Eveline stepped forward, her voice firm yet gentle. We must prepare, reinforce the village's defenses, rally the remaining knights. This is no ordinary enemy. We face an ancient curse tied to this very land. That night, under a shroud of mist, Aldrich pored over ancient manuscripts in the castle's dimly lit library. Candles flickered, casting long shadows over the dusty pages filled with forgotten lore. Among the brittle parchment, one passage caught his eye, a prophecy penned by a monk centuries ago. Oh, when the heart of St. Cecilia shines in darkness and shadows rise from the blood-soaked earth, a chosen soul must face the abyss to bind the curse and save the innocent. Aldrich's fingers trembled. The prophecy spoke of him, the chosen soul destined to confront the abyss itself. But the path was shrouded in peril and sacrifice. As dawn approached, a messenger arrived breathless, bearing news from the neighboring villages. More attacks, more unexplained disappearances. The shadow was spreading. Eveline gripped Aldrich's arm. We cannot wait. We must seek the source of this evil beyond the castle, into the cursed forest where the old world still clings. Aldrich nodded, the weight of his calling pressing heavily upon him. Together they gathered their most trusted allies, knights, scholars, and villagers willing to face the unknown. The journey ahead promised danger, darkness, and revelations that could unravel the very fabric of their reality. As they crossed the castle's threshold, the morning mist swallowed them whole, and the castle behind vanished like a fading memory. The storm was gathering, and Aldrich was ready to face it. The sun had barely risen when Aldrich, Eveline, and their small band of allies stepped beyond the castle's shadow. The air grew colder and heavier with each step toward the ancient forest that loomed ahead like a living nightmare. The villagers' warnings echoed in Aldrich's mind. No one who enters the cursed forest returns unchanged, if they return at all. But duty left no room for fear. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches like grasping hands blocking the pale morning light. The underbrush whispered secrets in a language older than any living soul. Eveline led the group cautiously, clutching an old iron cross blessed by the bishop. The evil here is ancient, older than even the castle itself, she whispered. This forest was once sacred ground, but it was defiled by bloodshed and dark rituals long forgotten. As they ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in, shadows stretching unnaturally. Strange symbols carved into the bark glowed faintly with an eerie green light. The party moved silently, senses heightened. Suddenly, a chilling howl pierced the silence, sending a wave of dread through the group. From the shadows emerged twisted figures, beasts once human, now cursed to roam as shadows of their former selves. Aldrich raised his crucifix, chanting prayers taught to him by the oldest monks. Light burst forth, pushing the cursed creatures back, but more appeared, drawn by the sacred power. The battle was fierce. Steel clashed with claw and fang. Screams echoed among the trees. Aldrich's faith was their strongest weapon, but the darkness was relentless. After what felt like hours, the forest fell silent once more. The cursed beasts fled, leaving behind a silence that pressed heavily on their hearts. Panting and wounded, the group pressed onward until they reached a clearing. There stood a stone altar covered in moss and bloodstains, surrounded by broken idols. Eveline knelt and traced ancient runes etched deep into the altar's surface. "This is the heart of the curse," she said grimly. An ancient sacrifice was made here to bind the darkness to this land. Aldrich touched the altar, feeling a pulse of malevolent energy. We must find the source of this evil, where it all began. Only then can we break the curse and free the souls trapped here. As night fell, they made camp nearby, the forest alive with unseen eyes watching them. Aldrich's thoughts drifted to the prophecy. The abyss awaited, and he was the chosen to face it. Tomorrow the real journey would begin. As dawn broke, the eerie silence of the cursed forest was replaced by a faint chorus of birdsong. Yet the oppressive heaviness lingered, a shadow clinging to Aldrich and his companions as they prepared to delve deeper into the heart of darkness. The clearing with the ancient altar marked the boundary of what the villagers called the Forgotten Grounds. Legend told of a time when the land was sacred to a secret order of monks who wielded divine power to protect the realm. But centuries ago, during a brutal war, the monks vanished mysteriously. Their sacred grounds were defiled by dark sorcery, and the land cursed. Aldrich studied the carvings on the altar once more, tracing the faded runes with reverence. Eveline carefully unfolded a brittle parchment she had found among her grandfather's belongings, a fragment of the monk's lost scripture. "The text speaks of an ancient relic," Eveline said softly, "a holy relic that binds the darkness. If we can find it, perhaps we can undo the curse." Their journey from the altar led them along a narrow path twisting through the dense forest. The canopy above was so thick that little sunlight reached the ground. Strange sounds echoed, the rustle of leaves, distant whispers, and something else, the faintest murmur of chanting. Suddenly a chill swept through the air. The group stopped. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in tattered robes, face obscured beneath a heavy hood. "Who dares enter the Forgotten Grounds?" The figure's voice was low and gravelly. Aldrich stepped forward, clutching his crucifix. "We seek to end the curse that plagues this land and free the souls trapped here." The figure nodded slowly, then pulled back his hood, revealing a gaunt face marked with scars and ancient symbols. "I am Brother Marius, last guardian of the Sacred Order. The war did not claim us all. Some of us remain, bound to protect the relic and to punish those who threaten it." Eveline stepped forward, eyes steady. "We mean no harm, Brother Marius. We only wish to restore peace." Marius studied them a long moment, then sighed. "The darkness you face is older and fiercer than you know. Many have tried to end it, and failed. If you are determined, follow me, but be warned. The path will test your faith, courage, and very soul." With that, Marius turned and vanished deeper into the forest. After a moment's hesitation, Aldrich and his companions followed. The forest seemed alive, watching. The ancient trees whispered secrets as they walked, and the shadows danced like restless spirits. Hours passed. The path grew steeper and more treacherous until they reached a cavern mouth hidden beneath a twisted oak. The air smelled of damp earth and something darker, decay and old blood. Marius lit a torch, illuminating faded murals on the cavern walls depicting battles between monks and demonic forces. At the cavern's heart lay a stone pedestal holding a small, ornate box sealed with iron clasps. "This," Marius said gravely, "is the reliquary. Inside lies the relic that holds the curse at bay. But it is also a prison for a great evil." Aldrich approached cautiously. "How do we free the land without unleashing the darkness?" Marius's eyes darkened. "That is the ultimate test. You must prove your worth, face your deepest fears, and confront the evil within yourselves." The chamber's shadows grew long and twisted, shapes flickering on the walls like living nightmares. Aldrich felt a cold presence pressing in on him, whispering doubt and despair. Steeling himself, he grasped the reliquary's clasp, ready to face whatever awaited inside. Aldrich's fingers trembled as he opened the ancient reliquary. Inside, nestled on crimson velvet, lay a small obsidian amulet etched with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering torchlight. The air grew colder, thick with a suffocating weight that pressed on their chests and whispered dark promises. Suddenly, the cavern walls began to pulse with a dim, eerie light. Shadows peeled away from the stone, swirling and twisting into grotesque shapes. The murmurs grew louder, now forming voices filled with malice and despair. "Face us, priest," hissed a chorus of unseen entities. "Prove your faith or be consumed by the darkness forever." Aldrich raised his crucifix high, chanting prayers taught by his mentor, his voice steady but heart-pounding. The shadows lunged, a wave of chilling cold that threatened to freeze his very soul. Images flashed before his eyes, visions of failure, of the village burning, of innocent lives lost, and worst of all, his own doubt creeping in like poison. But he clenched his fists and forced his gaze upward, focusing on the light beyond the cavern's mouth. Beside him, Eveline gripped her grandfather's amulet, whispering words of encouragement. Brother Marius stood firm, chanting alongside Aldrich, their combined faith pushing back the tide of darkness. Hours passed like minutes. The shadows shrieked and howled, but the trio held their ground. Slowly, the twisted forms dissolved into wisps of smoke, retreating back into the cracks of the cavern walls. When silence returned, Aldrich carefully lifted the obsidian amulet. "This is the key," he said. "But it is only part of the battle." Marius nodded solemnly. "The curse is tied to the relic, but also to the blood spilled on these lands during the war. The evil feeds on pain and hatred. We must cleanse the ground and ourselves." Eveline's eyes glimmered with renewed determination. "Then we must find the source of this hatred and put an end to it once and for all." Outside the cavern, the forest seemed less oppressive. The sun's rays pierced through the canopy, casting dappled light on the path ahead. But Aldrich knew the true trial was yet to come, a confrontation not just with external demons, but the darkness buried deep within their own hearts. The morning mist clung thickly to the forest as Aldrich, Eveline, and Marius emerged from the cavern. The oppressive silence was broken only by the distant cawing of ravens circling high above the ancient trees. Each step forward seemed to stir whispers, echoes of a past long buried yet never forgotten. Aldrich's mind churned with the knowledge that their battle was far from over. The obsidian amulet was but a fragment of the dark puzzle, a relic born from the blood-soaked soil of the centuries-old war that had ravaged these lands. It was said that during that brutal conflict, unspeakable horrors had been unleashed, forces of darkness that thrived on despair and death. "We must seek the battlefield," Aldrich said quietly. "Where the blood spilled still stains the earth, where hatred was born." Eveline nodded, her face pale but resolute. "If the curse feeds on pain and hatred, then we must confront the source. Only by cleansing the land can we hope to break the curse." The path they followed twisted deeper into the forest, ancient oaks towering overhead like silent sentinels. Marius paused, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. "There are old tales, whispered in the villages, of a massacre here. Soldiers betrayed, slaughtered in the dead of night. Their souls never found peace." A chill swept through the group as the weight of history settled upon them. The air grew colder, the trees seeming to lean in closer, watching. As they neared the site, remnants of forgotten trenches and shattered weapons lay half-buried beneath moss and soil. The ground was scarred, torn as if the earth itself had screamed in agony. The sun struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. Aldrich knelt, pressing his palm to the earth. "This is the heart of the darkness," he murmured. "We must call upon the spirits trapped here." Eveline retrieved a small pouch from her satchel, scattering herbs and incense across the ground. She began chanting softly in Latin, the ancient language weaving a fragile bridge between the living and the dead. The air shimmered and faint figures emerged from the mist. Spectral soldiers, eyes hollow, their faces twisted in eternal torment. The whispers turned to cries, a cacophony of sorrow and rage. "Why do you linger?" Aldrich asked, voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his soul. One ghostly figure stepped forward, a knight clad in rusted armor. Betrayed, forgotten, bound by hatred and broken oaths. "We will help you find peace," Aldrich promised. "But you must release your anger, your pain." The spirits wavered, their forms flickering like dying embers. Slowly the cries softened, replaced by a haunting silence. The shadows lifted, the curse loosening its grip. But as the last wraith vanished, a new darkness stirred beneath the earth. A deeper, more malevolent presence, waiting, watching. Aldrich rose, eyes grim. This battle has only begun. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Aldrich, Eveline, and Marius pressed onward, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The spectral battlefield behind them was a grim reminder of what had been and what still lingered unseen. Their path led them toward a place whispered about in hushed tones across nearby villages, the hidden sanctuary. Legend claimed it was once a refuge for those who opposed the dark forces that plagued the land, a place where faith and hope stood unyielding amidst the chaos of war and despair. Aldrich's heart quickened. If such a sanctuary still existed, it could be the key to unraveling the curse's final hold. But reaching it was no simple task. The sanctuary was concealed by powerful wards, protected by ancient magic that twisted the forest itself. Eveline consulted the tattered map they had recovered from the cavern. "We must follow the river upstream," she said, tracing a route with her finger. "According to the legends, the sanctuary lies beyond the Silver Falls." Marius grunted in agreement. "Silver Falls is treacherous. Many have tried to reach it, but never returned." As they pushed deeper into the wilderness, the trees thickened, their branches weaving into a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into eerie patterns. Strange symbols carved into the bark glowed faintly, marking the boundaries of the sanctuary's protective spell. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. From the shadows, twisted figures emerged, creatures born of the curse, neither fully human nor beast. Their eyes burned with malevolence, their claws scraping the earth like nails on wood. Aldrich raised his crucifix, chanting fervently. The silver gleamed in the dim light, casting beams that repelled the abominations. Eveline called upon sacred prayers, her voice steady and strong, weaving protection around them. Marius fought fiercely, his blade flashing through the gloom, cutting down the cursed fiends one by one. The battle was brutal and swift, but the trio prevailed, their unity and faith a shield against the darkness. Breathless but undeterred, they resumed their journey. The roar of Silver Falls grew louder, a thunderous cascade shrouded in mist and mystery. As they crested a ridge, the sanctuary revealed itself. A small stone chapel nestled within a glade, untouched by time. Ivy clung to its walls, and stained glass windows shimmered despite the overcast sky. Stepping inside, a hush fell over them. The air was thick with sanctity, a palpable aura of peace amid the turmoil outside. At the altar lay an ancient tome, its pages yellowed and fragile. Eveline reached out reverently, opening it to reveal cryptic texts and holy rites long forgotten. "This is what we needed," Aldrich said softly. "A guide to purify the land and banish the darkness once and for all." But as they pored over the pages, a shadow moved in the corner, a reminder that even in sanctuaries, evil lurks. The flickering candlelight cast elongated shadows across the stone walls of the hidden sanctuary's chapel. Aldrich, Eveline, and Marius sat huddled around the ancient tome, its fragile pages whispering secrets from a forgotten age. The air was heavy, saturated with a blend of sanctity and unease. "We must prepare," Aldrich said, voice low but resolute. "The curse's hold grows stronger. What we read here is not just history, it's a warning." Eveline traced a passage with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the archaic script. The text speaks of a shadow within, a darkness born not of the outside world, but of the heart itself. It is a spirit that corrupts from inside, turning kin into enemies and hope into despair. Marius leaned forward, his gaze intense. Could this be the source of the betrayals we've witnessed? The strange disappearances in the village? The restless dead? Aldrich nodded. Yes, the curse is not a mere external force. It festers in the souls of those who have suffered loss and fear. It feeds on anger, hatred, and guilt. A sudden chill swept through the chapel as the door creaked open. A shadow slipped inside, barely visible in the dim light. Eveline gasped, clutching her crucifix. "Who's there?" Aldrich demanded, rising slowly. From the darkness emerged a figure, cloaked in tattered robes, face obscured beneath a hood. The visitor's voice was gravelly but urgent. "I am Brother Tomas, keeper of the sanctuary's secrets. I sensed your arrival and feared the worst." Aldrich relaxed slightly but remained cautious. "We seek to end the curse that ravages the land. We need guidance." Brother Tomas stepped forward, revealing eyes weary but sharp. "The path is perilous. The shadow within can only be confronted by those willing to face their own darkness." He unfurled a scroll, revealing a ritual of cleansing and truth. "This rite will expose the hidden sins and fears that feed the curse. Only then can it be broken." Eveline looked at Aldrich and Marius, determination hardening her features. "We must do this, for the villagers, for ourselves." Preparations began at once. Candles were arranged in a circle, symbols drawn on the stone floor with chalk made from sacred ashes. The trio sat in the center, hearts pounding. As the ritual commenced, a haunting melody filled the chapel, an ancient hymn sung in a language lost to time. The flames flickered wildly, casting eerie patterns on the walls. One by one, visions assailed them. Aldrich saw the faces of those he failed to save, their eyes accusing. Eveline relived moments of doubt when her faith wavered. Marius confronted his rage and regret from battles past. The air thickened with tension as the shadow within stirred. A dark mist coalesced, whispering doubts and fears in their minds. "Give in," it hissed. "You are weak, you will fail." But the trio held firm, voices rising in defiance. The crucifix and sacred relics glowed brightly, pushing back the darkness. With a final agonizing scream, the shadow dissipated, leaving the chapel bathed in a serene glow. Exhausted but victorious, Aldrich spoke. "The curse is not just a curse, it's a test of the soul. We must continue with courage, faith, and unity." Brother Thomas nodded gravely. "The greatest battles are fought within. Be prepared, the true confrontation lies ahead." As dawn broke, the hidden sanctuary felt lighter, a beacon of hope amid encroaching darkness. Yet outside, in the heart of the cursed land, the malevolent force stirred, awaiting its next move. The dawn mist clung thickly to the forests surrounding the hidden sanctuary, swallowing sound and light alike. Aldrich, Eveline, and Marius had barely rested before setting out on their next journey, one that would take them deeper into the heart of the cursed land where no villager dared to tread. The map Brother Tomas had provided was ancient, its edges frayed, but it marked a place of power hidden in the hollowed woods, an ancient battlefield where dark rituals had been performed centuries ago. They believed the malevolent force still drew strength from this place. As they advanced, twisted branches reached like claws, and the silence was broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath their boots. Eveline's hand never left her crucifix, while Marius kept a keen eye on their surroundings. Suddenly a chilling whisper floated through the fog. "Leave, now or perish." The voice was faint, barely more than a breath, yet it carried a weight that chilled their bones. "Do not listen to it," Aldrich warned firmly. "It is the curse trying to turn us away." Eveline nodded, swallowing her fear. "We must be strong. We are here to end the nightmare." Hours passed as they navigated the eerie woods. Strange symbols carved into trees glowed faintly in the gloom, ancient warnings or traps laid long ago. At last they reached a clearing. The ground was littered with rusted weapons and shattered shields, the remnants of the forgotten battle. In the center stood a stone altar, cracked and stained with dark blotches that seemed to pulse. Brother Thomas stepped forward. "This altar is a gateway, a conduit for the curse's power. If we can cleanse it, perhaps we can sever its hold on the land." Aldrich knelt, placing his hand on the cold stone. A wave of despair surged through him, images of the countless souls lost here flooding his mind. Yet he steadied himself. "Eveline, prepare the holy water. Marius, stand guard." They began the ritual, chanting prayers that echoed through the fog. The altar trembled and the shadows gathered, swirling like a living storm. From the mist emerged spectral figures, soldiers caught in eternal battle, their faces twisted in torment. Their eyes glowed with sorrow and rage. Aldrich raised his crucifix. "By the light of the Almighty, be released." The spirits screamed but recoiled, fading into the morning light. The altar cracked further, and the oppressive darkness lifted. As silence returned, Eveline whispered, "Is it over?" Brother Thomas shook his head. "It is a victory, but the curse is cunning. We have weakened it, but not destroyed it. The heart of the evil lies deeper still." Marius looked toward the forest. "Then we go on, no matter the cost." The three gathered their strength, knowing the path ahead would demand more than faith. It would test the very limits of their souls. The morning sun struggled to pierce the thick canopy as Aldrich, Eveline, and Marius pressed onward. Their footsteps echoed faintly in the dense forest, the weight of their mission heavy in the air. The cleansing ritual at the altar had weakened the curse, but the source, the heart of darkness, remained elusive. Brother Tomas's map led them to a secluded ravine where an ancient crypt was said to lie beneath the roots of a gnarled oak tree. The villagers whispered of its dreadful history, speaking in hushed tones about a forbidden place where shadows gathered and the dead did not rest. The entrance was cleverly concealed beneath moss and earth, but Eveline's keen eyes spotted the faint outline of carved stone. Together they cleared the debris, revealing a heavy iron-bound door, its surface etched with archaic symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with an otherworldly energy. Aldrich traced a finger over the markings. "These wards are meant to keep something in, or perhaps to keep us out." Marius tested the door's weight. It resisted, but with effort, it groaned open, releasing a cold breath of stale air. The stench of decay filled their nostrils as they descended into the darkness. Inside, the walls were lined with cryptic inscriptions and faded frescoes depicting scenes of battle and dark rites. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant drip of water. As they ventured deeper, Eveline's light caught on a set of chained relics hanging from the walls, daggers, amulets, and rusted keys. Each seemed infused with a dark history. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A low growl echoed through the chamber. From the shadows, a figure emerged, cloaked with eyes glowing a sinister red. The air around it shimmered, distorting reality itself. "It has sensed us," Marius whispered, gripping his sword tightly. Aldrich stepped forward, voice steady but resolute. "By the sacred light, reveal your true form and be judged." The figure's cloak fell away, revealing a gaunt, pale visage twisted in malice, a wraith born of hatred and despair. The battle that followed was fierce. Shadow and light clashed in a tempest of wills. Aldrich's prayers became shields. Eveline's holy water burned like acid on the wraith's flesh. Marius fought with fierce determination, his blade striking true amid the chaos. At last, with a final chant, Aldrich drove the crucifix into the wraith's heart. It let out a tortured scream before dissolving into a cloud of black mist, vanishing into nothingness. Breathing heavily, the trio collapsed near the altar at the crypt's center. The oppressive weight had lifted for now. Brother Thomas approached, his face grave but hopeful. "We are closer to the truth than ever. The curse is unraveling, but the final confrontation awaits." Eveline nodded. "We must gather all our strength. The darkest hour is yet to come." Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath as the ancient crypt's secret slowly unfolded, revealing a destiny none could have foreseen. The heavy door of the crypt clanged shut behind them, sealing Aldrich, Eveline, and Marius in a silence that felt almost sacred. Though the wraith had been banished, an unsettling chill lingered, as if the crypt itself remembered the horrors it had witnessed. "We cannot linger," Aldrich said quietly, his breath still ragged from the fight. "There is more to uncover, but this place is not meant for the living." Eveline nodded, her fingers brushing the ancient inscriptions on the wall. "These writings, they tell a story, but it's incomplete, fragmented and cryptic." Marius, still gripping his sword, scanned the frescoes. The battles, the rituals, there's mention of a king, a betrayal, and a dark pact. Could this be the origin of the curse? Aldrich considered the possibility. If the curse began with a pact, then the true enemy might not be the demon itself, but the man who summoned it. They pressed deeper into the crypt, the flickering light of their torches revealing more frescoes, scenes of despair, sacrifice, and ancient bloodshed. One fresco showed a towering castle engulfed in flames, its silhouette eerily familiar. "Could this be Castle Valtoria?" Eveline whispered, eyes wide. "The very place where the war began?" Suddenly, a faint sound reached their ears, a distant whisper, like the breath of the dead, carried on a cold draft. It seemed to echo through the stone corridors, calling to them. "Did you hear that?" Marius asked, his voice tense. Aldrich held up a hand, motioning silence. "It's the voices of the past, warning or pleading." Eveline stepped forward, tracing the fresco depicting a cloaked figure making a pact with a shadowy entity. This must be Lord Ravenheart, the fallen noble who unleashed the darkness. The whispers grew louder, weaving around them like a spectral symphony. Suddenly a chill swept through the chamber, and the torchlight flickered violently. A shadow separated itself from the darkness, a translucent figure, a woman in tattered robes, her eyes filled with sorrow. Who are you?" Eveline asked, voice trembling. The apparition's lips moved, but the words were lost in a mournful wail. Aldrich stepped closer and made the sign of the cross. "Speak to us, spirit. What is your message?" The ghostly woman's form flickered, then her voice, though faint and ethereal, became clear. "He betrayed us. The pact, bloodshed, broken vows. The curse must be ended where it began." With that, the apparition dissolved into a mist, leaving behind an icy silence. "We need to find where the pact was made," Aldrich said grimly. "Only by confronting the source can we hope to break this curse for good." Outside, the wind howled, as if echoing her words. The journey was far from over, and darker secrets awaited in the shadow of Castle Valtoria. The first rays of dawn pierced through the heavy mist that shrouded Castle Valtoria. After weeks of relentless pursuit, Aldrich, Eveline, and Marius finally stood before the ancient altar buried deep beneath the castle's ruins, the very place where the dark pact had been forged centuries ago. The air was thick with an oppressive weight, but also a fragile hope. Aldrich knelt by the altar, his hands trembling slightly as he traced the carved symbols with reverence. "This is where it all began," he whispered. the source of the curse and perhaps its end. Eveline held the ancient manuscript tightly, the final piece of the puzzle. The ritual to break the curse requires a sacrifice, not of blood, but of the burden carried by the living. Marius looked doubtful. What kind of sacrifice? Aldrich looked up, his eyes fierce but resolute. Forgiveness and letting go. Only by freeing the souls trapped in hatred can the darkness be banished. Together they began the ritual, chants in Latin echoing softly through the cold chamber, prayers offered for the souls lost to the centuries of torment. The air shimmered as unseen forces stirred, the shadows pulling away like a tide receding from the shore. Suddenly, a radiant light enveloped the altar, illuminating the crypt with warmth and peace. The oppressive chill lifted, replaced by a calm so profound it felt like the castle itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Aldrich felt the weight on his heart lighten, as if the sins of the past had been cleansed. Eveline's eyes glistened with tears, and Marius lowered his sword, a rare smile breaking across his face. Outside, the villagers who had long lived under the shadow of fear felt the change. The oppressive darkness that had haunted their nights lifted, and for the first time in generations the sun seemed to shine a little brighter on their humble homes. As the trio emerged from the crypt, the ruins of Castle Valtoria no longer seemed foreboding, but a monument to endurance and hope. Aldrich turned to his companions and said, "The evil was never in the land itself, but in the hearts unwilling to forgive. Today we have reclaimed the light." Eveline nodded, adding, "And with that light, the village can finally heal." Marius sheathed his sword, his voice filled with newfound peace. "The past will not define us anymore." In the days that followed, the village began to rebuild, not just the physical structures, but the bonds between its people. The haunting whispers faded into stories told by the fireside, reminders of the strength it took to overcome darkness. Aldrich continued his mission, but now with a heart unburdened, knowing that even the deepest shadows could be pierced by faith and courage. And so, under the gentle glow of the European sun, life returned to the village, peaceful, hopeful, and free at last. Thank you for joining this chilling journey through darkness and light. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and turn on notifications to uncover more mysteries and legends with us. Your support keeps the story alive. Stay tuned for more thrilling tales.